Okay, so I think we're gonna get started. Yeah, if you could pull up our presentation, that would be great. Thank you so much. Like I said before, if you're just arriving, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to hear about your name, your gender pronouns, any identities that are important to you that you care to share, and what organization you are with. So my name is Drew. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a mixed race Black man. I'm from Santa Cruz, California, and I'm here with the New Conversation Initiative. We help people around the country and even internationally develop, utilize, measure, and implement the tool of deep canvassing, as well as how to organize around it. And I'm here with one of my favorite people to work with, the person I'm usually presenting with, Ash Overton. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name's Ash. I use they, them pronouns. Transgender person. I grew up between deep South Mississippi and rural Minnesota, and now I live in Los Angeles, so a little different. And I'm also with the New Conversation Initiative. Really excited to be here with you all. It's like Drew said, I'm like, where are you? But I'm like, sure you're here, and I'm excited to talk with you today.
Thank you, Ash. If we could get the next slide. If we could just advance it. Wait, sorry, actually, stay on this slide. There's a bit more to say. So like I said, we are the New Conversation Initiative. We do specialize in deep canvassing and supporting organizations around the country to utilize this tool. We have been doing this for roughly the last 9 years in a variety of contexts. We've been applying deep canvassing as well as other organizing methods in grassroots issue-based contexts, statewide, national, electoral, legislative, at many, many different levels. And we've been part of creating many types of deep canvas models, as well as measuring them and implementing them over all of these years. And so we've gotten to create, like I said, many models. And today we're going to share a little more deeply about one of our favorites. Back to you, Ash.
All right. Whoop. Hello. Great. Yes, back to me. So I think many people know what deep canvassing is, but I do want to just talk a little bit about it and give a little intro to it before we go a little deeper into a specific model that we created that we want to talk about today. Deep canvassing is a longer form conversation. Essentially, the most basic way to say it is it's with someone who's against us on an issue and it's to bring them to our side. It's been 12 years in development by organizers, thousands of volunteers, and of course it stands on many shoulders before that. And it's one of the only tactics that's been proven to lastingly change people's minds, like we said. And really the history of deep canvassing comes from the gay marriage movement. And specifically at a very low time in that movement. That wasn't really that long ago, relatively speaking, compared to like what the world looks like now. But it comes out of basically 30 losses in a row, 30 statewide big ballot measure losses in a row, including in 2008, the 30th that was in, progressive California, where even Bay Area liberals voted against gay people, right? And it was shocking and it was devastating, and it had already been devastating for a long time. And there was a lot of confusion in the movement of why we were losing and what was wrong, because we were going out using messaging of fairness and equality. And we would go talk to voters and say, hey, did you know that when gay people can't get married, there's over 1,000 rights they don't have access to? Here's all these things we don't get, right? And voters would say, yeah, that is unfair. And yet still they would turn around and vote against us. And it was really confusing. What do we need to do to figure out how to win? And what we understood and realized was that the problem was we weren't addressing their underlying homophobia, their fear and feelings about gay people, their attachment to marriage as an institution that needs to orient society around men and women being married together, right? Like a heteropatriarchal institution. And we weren't talking about that or processing that with people. We were relying on facts and believing it would work. And so what a group of people did, and you can see pictures here of several people who did that. You can see Drew in there as well, which is fun. But a group of people, the leadership lab actually, who kind of created deep canvassing, went out and just talked to the people who voted against us and asked them why. Why did you do that? And the model and the conversation style that is deep canvassing came out of that. And I kind of just mentioned it, but one of the biggest learnings that came out of that is actually that facts do not work to change people's minds if you don't address the underlying feelings that people have around it. And you know, the ways you do that in different conversations vary. They vary by the different issues, but what is always true in deep canvassing is that telling vulnerable stories about our real lived experiences that connect to these issues is the thing that we need to do to help people change their mind, to move on an issue. And, you know, many organizations, many people want to be able to use deep canvassing, right? And why not? Of course, you want to bring the people who are against you with us. What a great strategy. What an important thing that we need to do. As we've seen from, you know, the Trump election, there are 70 million people who feel a very specific way about things. And, you know, many organizations want to be able to create their own deep canvas models for the issues that they're working with. And one of the things that I want to make clear, and I think that's important to say, is that just having these conversations is a high skill thing. It's a high skill tactic. It's one of many tactics, but it is a high skill one. And creating them, you know, building them out, knowing what to listen for, what needs to be in the script, and how to do that is a whole other thing. And we actually want to talk about that process today, because I know many people want to hear about it. And so we're going to do that. But I do also want to be clear, you're not going to walk away from this with like a step-by-step understanding of how to build a deep canvas, right? This is just going to be a start. We'd have to be here for a few days of just us talking to you for a while for you to learn that. But one of the things about the New Conversation Initiative, who we work with and where we work, is that we are about trying to help organizations learn how to do this. So we are going to talk today about, trying to see if this slide will switch. I think I gotta click it again. There we go. Specifically developing a script that Drew and I created in 2019. And it's a jail and prison abolition script that was centered around a ballot measure, a policy called Measure R, that was voted on in Los Angeles County. So we created this in 2019, and the ballot measure was in March of 2020, right before canvassing became a very different thing. So we're going to talk about that. And just to start with, I want to give some context for what Measure R is and what this ballot measure was about. So Los Angeles County has the largest jail system in the world. And you know, even though that's true, the county itself was planning to invest $3.5 billion more into that jail system for a jail expansion plan to build more jails. And so a group of people worked really, really hard to put together this policy called Measure R that would halt that jail expansion plan and investigate investing in alternatives and what that would do, which they knew. There's lots of research around this, but it was an attempt essentially to divest from jails and invest in alternatives to incarceration, permanent supportive housing, mental health services, addiction services, job training, things we know actually work to lower crime and help people. And there was another part of it as well that was about oversight of the sheriff's department. But we really chose to focus on jails in this deep canvas conversation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But before we move on, I also want to really fully credit the leaders of this campaign, Patrisse Cullors and the Justice LA Coalition, who created this policy. got it on the ballot, and ran an amazing campaign to pass this. This ballot measure did pass in March of 2020. And we were part of this coalition working in a persuasion universe leading up to the election and using this model. So that's a little context for Measure R policy and kind of this campaign that we were part of. And now what I really want to talk about is our script development process. And what we learned we needed to develop a script like this. And so the first question is, where do you start? Where do you start with making a script like this? And one thing that we know, and one thing that we learned, is that we have to ask ourselves, first and foremost, what is the story that voters are telling themselves? And I'm going to get a little more into what I mean by that. So the first thing we went out is we just went and talked to voters and asked them what they think and why. No attempt at persuasion, no attempt at like a longer form script, just spending a ton of time. These were long conversations, but a ton of time just trying to understand what's the story they tell themselves about jails and prisons. Because just to be clear, voters conflate them. They put them together, which is fine. We let them do that. But what's the story they tell themselves, and what are the feelings underneath it about jails? And the reason that we start there, and the reason that we have to start there actually, is that systems of oppression, right, which jail is one of those. It's a complex one that hooks up with a lot of different kinds of systems of oppression, right? But systems of oppression are held up by stories. And those stories are really lies, right? And they make people have really big feelings, which is what they're meant to do, right? The opposition, conservatives, people like that are very good at this. And almost always, those stories bring up feelings of fear, scarcity, and dehumanization. And it's really important actually to bring those feelings in, and it leads to a lot of things. So for example, if you think about immigration, right, there's scarcity and fear about immigrants are going to take jobs. They're going to take your jobs away, right? And the scarcity in the story there is that there aren't enough jobs. There's not enough money or resources to go around. So instead of blaming the people who are really to blame, just like wealthy people taking your money, you're going to blame immigrants, right? And that's a story that people believe. And along with that is that immigrants are different and dangerous, right? Which is both bringing up fear for people and starting that dehumanization piece with people. Immigrants don't share our culture, don't share our values, right? That's a dehumanizing thing. And all of this combined, these stories that people tell themselves, these stories that are told that people believe, and the feelings that come with them, allow people to do horrible things and support really horrible policies that probably in theory they wouldn't believe they were capable of doing. But now we have kids in jail, in cages, right? Separated from their parents. We're currently doing that, and many people support it, right? And it's because they believe a story and they want to believe a story. But really it's the feelings underneath it that are propelling them forward. And we know that in deep canvassing, that feelings are actually what make people's decisions, not facts, right? Remember that. And so the thing we knew we needed to start with was finding out what are the stories that people tell themselves about jails and prisons, and what are the feelings that go along with it, right? And an important part of this process, starting this process, these conversations and asking people to tell us this, is really listening to what people have to say for themselves. You know, letting the assumptions you have about this process, about what people think, go, but also letting your judgment go of people. And that's a really hard thing to do because we don't agree, right? And they're probably saying things that are really horrible, but in order to really connect with people and listen to people, you have to do that. And in order to really find out what's true for people, that's a part of this process. And so we went out and tried this and had a lot of different conversations with people. And as we were canvassing, you know, and analyzing this information we were getting from voters and trying different things out, we were really asking ourselves, God, okay, so there's all this stuff swirling around, and what is important to focus on in these conversations? Like, what's the hook? What's the thing? What are the stories? What are the things that people need to process that's going to really, what's holding this up, right? What's going to move people in a lasting and permanent way to divest from jails and prisons and invest in alternatives? And so Drew, I'm going to kick it back to Drew because he's going to talk a little bit more about like what that process looked like, what we were analyzing, what we were seeing, and what we realized we needed to do in these conversations. So I'm going to try to move this slide forward and kick it to Drew.
All right, I think I'm back. Thanks so much, Ash. That was incredible. So like Ash was saying, we knew pretty much from the get-go that we wanted to create a prison abolition script, but we weren't really sure what the thing we would need to process with voters was going to be. We didn't quite know what it was going to take. And so the two, you might say easiest options seem to be, or not easy isn't quite the right word, but the most logical things that we thought about trying were talking about how racist prisons are and how disproportionately racist who we lock up is. Or talking about how many people we're locking up who haven't done anything violent, people who are experiencing drug addiction, people who are experiencing homelessness or mental health struggles. That seemed like an opportunity essentially to create empathy or to create empathy with voters and possibly get them to vote in support of legislation that would reform this horrible system. So we went out and we gave it a shot. We tried this. And it worked in some cases, when we talk to people about race or about nonviolent people that are locked up, sometimes they would agree with us. But at the same time, in almost all those conversations, they would bring up the issue of violence as well. The question, if we're going to dramatically reduce the jail or prison population, is that also going to let violent people out into our communities and threaten our safety of our families and our kids and stuff? And we weren't succeeding in getting around that issue. And it felt like we needed to do that was an essential thing, both if we wanted to win this piece of legislation, Measure R. It's a huge risk if you don't address this deep issue around people's fear of violence. All the sheriff's department or opposition would have to do possibly is run a fear ad right before they vote, and we might lose everyone that we had talked to about race and nonviolent criminals. But additionally, we think there's a much greater opportunity with every conversation we have if we find this deeper issue that is unresolved with our voters. There's this long-term impact that we can fight for if we don't go for what you might call the low-hanging fruit of the thing that's easiest to talk about, the most easy thing for voters to agree with us about. If we go for that deeper, even scarier topic, in this case, violence, a lot more is possible. And perhaps that's what it means to fight for freedom and liberation instead of just to win a piece of legislation. Next slide. So we were processing all this. We were trying it out. We were running into that wall. And then someone shared this amazing article with us. And feel free to say in the chat if you've read this article. It was in the New York Times Magazine, and it's called "Is Prison Necessary? Ruth Wilson Gilmore Might Change Your Mind." And this was, it was just instrumental in our process of whittling down, what are the different stories that people are telling themselves about jails, what's actually true, and what's possible in these conversations. Next slide. So first off, the article goes to great lengths to pay respects to a lot of the other people that are in this discourse about our incarceration problem in the United States. So respect was paid to the new Jim Crow, 13th, Michelle Alexander, a lot of the people that have deeply contributed to our national dialogue that we are having about incarceration. That's been a really wonderful thing. And after respecting and acknowledging all of that, there's critique offered about some of the things that have been said in that content. So I'm going to read a quote. Gilmore takes apart these narratives that prison is a modified continuation of slavery, and by extension, that most everyone in prison is Black. It is a false and harmful stereotype to overassociate Black people with prison. So that's a bit of a mouthful. Just take that in for a second. And I want to be clear here. Prison and jails and how we choose who gets locked up as a society is deeply, deeply racist. We're not saying that it isn't. But the question that Gilmore is asking here is that the thing that's actually holding this system up? Is that the thing that's stopping people from supporting abolition legislation or becoming abolitionists? And this information was both distressing to me, and it was also quite a relief. It's like when I started canvassing on this issue, I was really excited to possibly have my best opportunity to have a deep conversation with voters about race that I've wanted to do since I started doing deep canvassing. And then it was also really frustrating when it was really hard to talk about race in my conversations, and it just wasn't working out in the way that I thought it would. But at the same time, it was relief because, there's a lot of information about how most inmates are white people, though the inmate population is disproportionately full of, Black people and brown people and people who aren't white. I still knew that it was like mostly full of white people, and it felt like there's some sort of inner contradiction that I hadn't been able to sort through. And this article was offering me, a different point of view on it. So yeah, they acknowledge that white people are incarcerated in really high rates and that race might not be the thing holding the prison system together. And again, like we were trying this in our conversations, this wasn't moving people to be fully and completely in support of the policy we were fighting for. And I wish we could show you all these conversations. We were going out with video cameras in this iteration process to find, as we were refining our script and figuring out what would be effective. So we have tons of video of us trying to talk about race or, people with mental health struggles, drug addiction, all these things. And it worked, it was helpful. It moved people closer, but it didn't get to the underlying root cause that we wanted to get to. Next slide. So the elephant in the room was violence. Voters were bringing it up, and we were trying to talk about it, but we weren't succeeding. We weren't sure if we could talk to people about it. And the article offered us good guidance on that as well. So I'm going to read another quote. When people are looking for the relative innocent line, they are missing something. Instead of asking whether anyone should be locked up or go free, why don't we think about why we solve our problems by repeating the kind of behavior that brought us the problem in the first place? So like I said, a lot of times with the race and the relative innocence essentially is like relying on the fact that it's easier for people to see certain kinds of people as innocents. That is to say that like, people in jail for something non-violent are more innocent than the violent people. And maybe if we just fix that part, that's kind of the solution to the problem. And that can feel safer. It's easier to get agreement than transformation in a conversation. It's much easier to talk about someone struggling with addiction that maybe didn't harm someone than it is about someone who did something violent. And the question that Gilmore is proposing here is the problem that we punish too many innocent people, or is the problem that we're relying on punishment in the first place? And as a society, if we still have prisons and jails in some form, are we stopping violence by locking people up there, or are we participating in it? So we read this article and we were hearing these concerns about violence at the doors, and we realized we were trying the easier option and it wasn't cutting it. But it turned out talking about violence was exactly what we needed to do. And we'll show you a little bit more about exactly what that looked like. But that was our process of weighing what we were afraid to talk about, what felt hard to talk about, but ultimately what was the underlying thing that can help us deconstruct this system. It's like, the goal here isn't to create a jail that's less racist. that's kind of Gilmore's one of her big points. It's not good enough to make a less racist jail because it would still be a jail. If it's less racist, it's still just a very harmful, violent thing that actually is in conflict with our values, even if we haven't really thought about it fully. So I think we're switching back to Ash.
All right. There I am. Okay, cool. All right. So thank you so much for that, Drew. So I wanna pull us back now into the process of like what we decided to do, right? What we think the story is that people are telling themselves, and then the script that we created from that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what the script looks like, and then we're going to show you about a 13-minute video of a conversation that I had a while back now. I can't believe it's been that long. And so again, right, we asked ourselves, like, what's the story? What's the story here that people are telling themselves? And really, one way you can actually think about it is, what is their worldview, right? And that, in a way, deep canvassing is taking someone's worldview and trying to change it, right? Trying to give them a new worldview, a new story that they tell themselves about this system, but actually a new story that's grounded not in a story that's really been handed to them by people in power, by fear and feelings that have been handed to them that aren't really their own. It's not a real lived experience. Take, for example, this immigration story, that any of those things have come true for people, right? And so we want to replace it with something different. And so we want to ground it in their real lived experience and their stories. So we had to figure out, what are the stories that we need to process with people? What are the stories we need to share to help them change their worldview? So I just want to start first by talking about what their worldview is and what we wanted it to be, right? And so part of that is, okay, there's a belief here that people are, this is what we would hear at the doors, just to be clear. This is all coming from like thousands of conversations that we had with people that are, many of them are on film and we watch them back. So people are good or bad, right? And once you can label someone as bad, right, you can dehumanize them. You can inhumanely punish them, right? And keep them and lock them up, right? And this idea that people are good or bad, and that's like who you are. It's core to now who you are as a person, versus like sometimes people do bad things, right? And there's a difference, right? There's also, belief in punishment, belief that punishment actually works, that punishment actually does change people's behavior and it is good and important to do. And that if people make mistakes, they should be punished and that will help them learn a lesson, right? There's a belief in that here. There's also this belief in a rock bottom, right? That people just haven't hit their rock bottom yet, and we have to just keep punishing them until they do, and then they will somehow magically come back from that, and just spring back up from that rock bottom. And what's happening there is this, like, I don't have to be accountable, and they don't need help. No one should help them because it's important that they hit this rock bottom, that we don't know where it ends. And that's just how it goes, and you can just bounce back from that, right? When in actuality, rock bottom can people often don't bounce back from that. And what people really need is help, right? And then there's this ultimate fear, right? That people are dangerous, which actually isn't totally untrue, right? There are actually dangerous people. There are violent people, but the piece here is that jails and prisons keep us safe from dangerous people, that they succeed at weeding out all danger in our society. And so what we needed to help people process is actually, like, no one is good or bad. Everyone is capable of both. And typically, experiencing harm, trauma, and oppression lead people to do harmful things to others or need to do desperate things, which is often why people are in jail or prison, right? Or it's exactly why they are, right? Punishment is a form of harm and trauma, and it recreates it. It's a cycle. Harm and trauma is a cycle that people go through, and actually meeting people's needs is what changes things for people and makes us safe. And punishment as a cultural orientation is actually bad for us. It keeps perpetuating all these things we say we're trying to solve. And it really comes out of patriarchy and slavery and genocide and capitalism, like the things, like the founding things of this country, right? It's a thing that we embody, and there's a reason we're the largest incarcerator in the world. That is not an accident. It's a cultural belief that we have. And so we had to find a way to shift that. And so what I want to talk about now is how we designed our scripts. So Deep Canvas scripts all have these 4 pieces in them. They have an introduction of the policy, and they have a first rating, a 0 to 10. How likely are you to vote for this in support of? Are you 0 is, you're all the way against it, 10 is in favor, right? And then there are 2 kinds of stories that we exchange. And what we're doing in these stories is trying to get at those pieces that we talked about. So the first story we talk about is, do you know someone who's been to jail? And not just tell me the story of why they went to jail. They did this, now they're in jail. But what was their personal experience of finding that out? How do they know them? How are they connected to them? Which starts this process, regardless of whether or not they like that person, whether or not they are still connected to that person. It's about the fact that once you talk about an actual human being, this black and white, people are good or bad, and dehumanization, it is not as possible. It starts to break that up, right? That dehumanization piece. So we start with that story. And it's also connected to their real life experience, which we want them to process. Not this vague person who's coming to murder them in their bed, right, at night, but a real person that they know. And then the second story that we talked about, which was the thing we really had to figure out, was how to get at this idea of violence. And what we wanted to ground it in is actually a time that they harmed someone. And this is not saying like a time again, I keep saying murder because it's the ultimate thing, but like that we are all capable of harm, especially when we're struggling. And that a lot of times harm is very much a part of our lives. It's part of our families. It's part of many things that happen to us. And usually it's a cycle, right? Usually it's something that cycles through our lives very much. And it's quite an intimate thing that many of us actually exist with and live with on a regular basis. And jail is sometimes part of that and sometimes not. And then the last step that we do in any Deep Canvas conversation is get a final rating and address their concerns, right? Their lingering concerns that they maybe brought up at the beginning, and sometimes they fall away or sometimes they don't, right? But we get that final rating. So this is the script that we created and kind of an overview of what it looks like. And what I want to do now is show a video. We have kindly titled this voter as wind chimes because there's wind chimes that you can hear in the background while I'm talking to her. So let's see, I'm going to try to do a tech thing. Just pull up this video. That didn't work. There we go. So this is like I said, this is a video of me talking to a voter. We sadly didn't have time to put subtitles on this video, and truly I apologize. It's an accessibility thing. And so if you want to take a second now to really like turn up your volume all the way, put headphones in, or anything like that to make sure you can hear it. I think it's pretty audible, but I know that it can be difficult. And this conversation gets very personal. It gets personal for me. And I'm fine with that, just to be clear. So if you have feelings about hearing personal things about me, don't worry, I don't have feelings about it. Also, just a trigger warning, there's discussions of drug use, drug abuse, family abuse, family trauma, right? I mean, we named it at the beginning in the script, that's what we're talking about, but that does come up in this conversation. Yeah, and the other thing I want to say too is like what we just described is a whole process that we went through to get to this conversation. This is not where we started, not even close. And again, like we said, we wish we had more time to kind of show you pieces of a bunch of video. That would be amazing. But this is kind of the end of that where we got, and you're getting to see it. So I'm excited for you to see it. And yeah, on that note, I will press play. It's about 13 minutes long. And let's go for it. Scale 0 to 10, where 0 is like, I'm 100% sure I believe it's that. 10 is 100% sure your favorite in the middle. It's like uncertainty. Where would you put yourself? Okay. You had to put a number to it? Like, let's get a 6. A 6? Okay. And why is that right for you? They commit crimes, but I'm trying to say they commit crimes. And we give them, they just eat it 3 meals a day, stricter laws. Yeah. And do you know what they do? No. Yeah. See, like, start with the question. Yeah. No. Feel like you have like feelings about that. I mean, you know people have to share something, but no one's on the other side. Yeah. It's starting out. I feel like I do know a lot too. I know someone that my daughter went out with, and he went in for drug abuse and came up with him. Oh. He went in. Okay. Oh, so your daughter dated him for a while? Yes. Okay, got it. How long was he like someone around? I feel like sometimes people take people, and it's not a long thing, but did you know him well, or? Like, oh. Okay, so you watched that process. Okay, got it. So you went in for drugs. So, okay, and then you got out. And he was first user, then he was man. Yeah. Oh wow. And so that's still texting you. Yeah. What was it like when you found out? I don't know. I feel like you strong feelings. So not hear about each other. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Was she already out of it? No, she was living here, and then she's meeting. Yeah. That conflict around that, or just yourself? With his kids? Yeah. With him? Oh, they're here. Oh, okay. Yeah. That's really hard. I mean, I don't know if you can, like, we should work out on struggling. Oh, yes. Yeah. So because stand there and you watch me. Okay. Yeah. Then you have to be strong. Yeah, I feel like yeah. Well, that's the thing. Well, no, I hear you. No, I don't think that we've been talking for that. That's true about you, but yeah, I think like I guess when I think about jail, I'm like, is there a way? Is there a punishment? And I feel like we really mix accountability with punishment and with hurting people. Yeah. Yeah. This facility. Yeah. And the this facility. And Hi, everyone. I think it's become pretty clear that it's like very impossible to hear this, which, yeah. So I think given that we have, about 15 minutes left, I feel like maybe the better way to go is for us to like maybe recap this conversation. Like we really should have had subtitles, and I apologize because I think that would have been. Also, I tried to turn my mic off because it was the one that was on, and then I think it muted the video. So I think there's just like no great solution to this problem we have. And I totally apologize. I really would have loved you to be able to hear this video. But so I'm going to give just like my attempt of a verbal recap of this video. And then we'll go to a Q&A. So we can hopefully, if you want to ask questions in the chat, we can go through and try to answer them. But so essentially this voter starts by saying that she is not in favor of this policy because she believes that actually there needs to be stricter laws. She apparently doesn't enjoy that prisoners or people who are incarcerated are getting like a bed to sleep in, 3 meals a day, that's too kind to them, and that that's why crime is just rampant. And she starts by saying she doesn't know someone who's been to jail, but then we talk a little more, and actually she does know someone who's been to jail. It's someone, her daughter, she said like used to date him, and then we realize actually her daughter's still dating him. He went in for drug addiction, drug abuse. He came out and they're still together. And actually she has taken over guardianship of her daughter's children because they are still together. So actually she's very impacted by having this person in her life. And she's clearly very upset about it. And one of the things that we then talk about is that she's raising these children. And she kind of mentions, I'm raising them much different than I raised my kids. And she talks a little bit about punishment and punishing them. But where we actually get to is she says this quote, well, if I raised these kids how I raised mine, I would be in jail. And it feels like you could have a real gotcha moment there, but actually we don't really do that. Or I don't do that. I just say, why? What's true there? And she admits that, she was, verbally and physically abusive to her children. And that now she's raising these ones differently. And she thinks that's better. And she tries to say like, oh, the good thing about it, the good thing about the fact that I was abusive is my kids now know what they don't want to do. But we actually circle around that a little bit and get to her to admit that actually they broke a cycle. they broke a cycle of abuse, and now she's doing it too. She's realized she wants to do something different. And so, we process that. And to be clear, along the way, I'm telling stories as well. I'm telling stories about, a family member of mine who went to jail and prison, my struggles with addiction, my struggles with things like how I've harmed people. And she's telling me hers. And then eventually, we're also still processing this guy who went to jail that her daughter's still with. And she's trying to keep being like, well, you do the crime, you got to do the time, like punishment is still important. And she keeps wanting to like hold on to this idea, and we're just kind of slowly pulling it apart as we go. And finally we get to the point where it says, like, well, actually what's true is that my daughter experienced abuse from someone in our family, and we didn't talk about it. And I forced her not to talk about it. I forced us to never talk about it. And that's when I started to see her starting to do drugs, starting to date this guy, and I kicked her out of my house. And so she kind of admits this cycle, this whole thing that led to this, and that actually how she's raising these kids now, where you talk about things and you think about and you process things and all that, is so much better, right? And so, and then we also get her to admit that, sorry, I'm really trying hard to recap this too, and it's like kind of complicated. So I'm going to do my best, and we're going to get to Q&A. But to admit that, the punishment of prison or jail, like taking everything away from someone, taking away the trust that their family could have for them, taking away their connections to their community, is not actually equal to like what would help people be better. And also that like we're not giving people support. And she kind of connects, her not supporting her daughter to, just punishment, and like changing the way she punishes her kids to like, what is punishment and does it work? And then at the end we process, she brings it up. We go back to the scale and she says, okay, but what about all the people, what about violent people? What about people who hurt people? And, one of the things that I say is, okay, yes, it's true. People can be violent. People hurt people. That's a fact. But I say, but do you really believe, is it really true that everyone who hurts someone is in jail? Everyone who hurts someone goes to jail. Is that what's happening? Like, did that happen for your family? Is everyone who's hurting someone actually doing that? No. And when we send people there, is it actually stopping them from continuing to do these things or helping them be better? Look at your daughter's boyfriend. She was like, no, it's not, right? So these are the things we're processing, but she processed it through her own stories. And what I did was just, she would try to assert these things again of like, well, she just really wanted to hold on to like, well, prison and jail, you got to have it. But I kept bringing it back to like, okay, but look at your real experience, this real life experience you told me. Let's like ground it in that and your real big feelings about that and how that's happened. So that's how this conversation goes. She does end it being supportive and even saying like, we have to give these programs like 10 years or, it won't work. We really got to invest in it. So I feel like it's a very successful conversation. I'm sorry that we did not have subtitles for you. We can work on that. Maybe we can work on that and send it out or something. But yeah, so okay, so we have 10 minutes. I'm going to stop and get to the Q&A. I see Drew just popped back up. I'm going to exit out of this unhelpful video we just showed you and pull back our slides so that you can look at a slide that says Q&A so that it's the Q&A. So we're going to spend, go up until the like 42 on this. So sorry, only like 6 minutes. And then we'll talk about some opportunities to learn more about deep canvassing and we'll go. So yeah, Drew, I think maybe you've been up in the chat more than I have. If there's questions that people want to ask, let's do it.
Yeah, I'm glad someone got the link to the article, the Ruth Wilson Gilmore article in there, if y'all want to take a read at that. But yeah, please, any other questions you have about anything we've said. please let us know.
Okay, yeah. Do you explicitly name prison abolition or other contentious issues when talking to people? Yeah. There's like a piece in the video that I wish I could remember, because we kind of say like, but not directly, because jargony things are not very useful for people, like defining these things. But I, at some point, and I wish we could watch it because I can't remember. I don't know, Drew, if you remember, where I'm like, we kind of are really naming like it's like that worldview thing, right? What's the worldview of being an abolitionist that we can offer people? What are the like ways of seeing things? Yeah, go ahead.
Are you talking about like the investment part, where you talk about how we've invested very deeply in punishment and incarceration and it doesn't work? And we need to try something. Ash, it's like really powerful in the video. Ash asks her, or says, you tried something different with your family and you broke that cycle of, physically punishing your kids. And maybe we need to try that as a society with our incarceration systems. We need to imagine something. It's like we're trying to imagine something that doesn't exist. And that's really scary because we've been solving our problems one way for a really long time. But it doesn't work. So we need to imagine something that would, which would be support and care. And yeah.
Right. So the explicitness is in like, I'm not shying away from saying, I don't believe jails and prisons work, but I don't use the word abolition because it doesn't actually mean anything without what I mean to say is we've invested in this and it doesn't work. And that's what I'm saying. And yeah. And also like really acknowledging and holding like, this is scary. Isn't it scary? You're scared. I get it. Like it's scary to imagine something that doesn't exist, and that's like a piece of it. So
yeah. I'm seeing questions about recruitment of volunteers to do this, as well as retaining them. And I mean, I love talking about that. I want to do a whole presentation about that. And we had to make the sad choice that is beyond the scope of what we can fully get into in this training right now. But I will say that in the same way that there was a whole process of narrowing down what it would take to create our script, there was an equally nuanced process of recruiting people and organizing people around this issue, processing their stories and our stories about violence and jail and harm in order to have this conversation. And we did recruit hundreds of people, and we did have hundreds of these conversations. And hopefully you can come to something else we do so we can tell you more about it.
Yeah, we actually had thousands of these. Yeah, we had thousands. We recruited hundreds of volunteers. So the canvassers it was majority. There was Drew and I were staff, as well as Steve, who I think is somewhere in the ether right now. So we had 2 full-time staff, 1 half-time staff, and the rest were a mix of, some volunteers who gave full-time, running phone banks, running different things. We ran recruitment phone banks, we ran canvases, we did all of it. So the training, I see things about the training too. So, and I can see questions about the universe. So the training for this deep canvas is about, I think it ended up being an hour and a half of training. And that included a couple of videos that we showed, and just getting in, because there's both like, what is this script? How does it work? Because some of the pieces that we just told you, not all of it, this is a very different training, but like, how does the script work? But then there's the skills. There are a lot of skills to deep canvassing. There are a lot of skills of like, how to be curious and ask questions. It started with me being like, oh, do you know someone who's been to jail? And she was like, no. I don't. And like the skill to get from that to you fully telling me like, actually, I've taken over custody of these children and it deeply impacted my life. And a little later down the road, I'm going to tell you about family abuse happening in my life. That's a high skill thing to do these conversations while also like addressing people's concerns and holding all these things. So we have a full training to like give people the skills to even just get into these conversations is a whole thing. So the training is long, and it has to be. And we have long Canvas days. And I think sometimes people believe that volunteers won't do hard things. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. We had, sometimes up to 200 plus person canvases, sometimes more, and people come for 8 hours. We have a full training, eat breakfast together, hang out, like go canvas, come back, have lunch, have a really long debrief as well. Because part of what these things need is people need to process what they just did as well. Like this is not just a lot for voters. This is like a thing that a really big lift and a thing for people to engage in. But like that, you would think, because true transformation is not an easy thing. But people actually want that, and people want to show up to this. And I think sometimes we do a disservice to volunteers by believing they won't do as much as we think they'll do. And okay, so we gotta pause. I want to keep going, but we gotta pause so that we can talk about some opportunities to learn more about deep canvassing with the new conversation initiative. And just ways for you to get a hold of us. Because if you want to keep asking these questions, we're really, really happy to keep answering them. We don't have to stop here. Like we can keep having a conversation because it's important. So one thing we want to talk about is the Deep Canvas Institute. So the new conversation initiative is partnered with People's Action, and they do, I think it's bi-monthly, but it's called the Deep Canvas Skills Series, which is basically a 3-day process to show up and learn some of these skills and get to practice and try it. So if you look at the bottom here, I'm just gonna right there, the bottom right, if you go to this link, which maybe if someone could put in the chat, but you can sign up for this Deep Canvas Institute to learn more about this. And so the dates, the next one is October 13th is a phone bank where we're calling into Minneapolis right now that is trying to pass. There's an initiative to amend charter amendments to make it possible to move money out of the police and into more, basically these kind of like a divest invest kind of policy in Minneapolis. And then the 18th and the 19th are the skills series, the training pieces, the training days to come and learn more skills and dig even deeper into deep canvassing. And just to give you an idea, there's actually many ways to get involved in this. So there's the orientation piece, overview of deep canvassing. There's the Deep Canvas phone bank to learn these things, which is 3 hours long. There's the 2-day skills series, which I just mentioned, which is to learning how to get into the conversation, curiosity and listening, telling stories, assertiveness, redirects. And then there's an opportunity to even get one-on-one, side-by-side coaching and have these conversations as well. So this is really learning how to deep canvas, the skills of deep canvassing, not necessarily how to create them, which is what we just talked about it, but you have to start there as well. All right, so it is 1:45 or another 45 associated with your time zone. So we have to end, but these are I'm Ash, and it's at thenewconvo.org. That's Drew at newconvo.org. So if you want to email us and ask questions or have a one-on-one or talk, please do. Oh, nice. Someone put the Minneapolis Charter Amendment. I'm from Minnesota, love Minneapolis. So hey. And I think Ella is in the chat here talking more about the DCI, Deep Canvas Institute. Drew, if you want to round us out.
Thank you so much for coming. And there's just so much I wish we could show you, but I'm really glad we got to say what we said. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but thank you. It was an honor.